The security camera caught her boots at 3:47 in the morning. Military issue, worn at the heel. Moving through a hospital corridor like someone who had walked through worse places than this. Nobody on the night shift noticed. Nobody thought to ask. That was their first mistake. Her name was Elara Voss. 34 years old. Quiet. Reliable. The kind of nurse who refilled your coffee without being asked and never complained when a shift ran 3 hours over. The staff at Mercy Ridge General in Caldwell City had worked beside her for almost 3 years and thought they knew everything about her. They knew almost nothing. By sunrise, 6 people would be in custody, a classified conspiracy would be unraveling at federal speed, and the woman they had mocked, overlooked, and pushed to the edge of quitting would be the only reason any of them were still breathing. But first, the coffee mug. If this story already has you leaning forward, you're exactly where I want you. Follow along until the very end, and drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The mug hit the floor at 3:51 a.m. It didn't fall. It was placed there, or more accurately, it was knocked there by a forearm that moved with the deliberate carelessness of someone who had never once been told to watch what they were doing. The coffee spread across the break room linoleum in a dark, slow fan. Ceramic shards caught the fluorescent light, and Dr. Roman Schaefer, senior attending physician of the Mercy Ridge General Emergency Department, turned back to the refrigerator like nothing had happened. "You left your cup in the middle of the counter again," he said, not looking back. Elara Voss was already crouching, picking up pieces. "It was against the wall," she said, "clearly not far enough." He pulled out a bottle of water, twisted the cap, took a long drink. He was broad-shouldered and thick-necked, the kind of man who occupied every room he walked into by sheer physical assumption. He had been chief trauma attending for 6 years. He had a way of filling silence with condescension that most people in the department had long since stopped fighting. Elara set the broken pieces on the counter and reached for paper towels. "Your break ended 8 minutes ago," Schaefer said. "My break ends at 4. Trauma's backed up. Dunmore needs help in Bay 3. Dr. Dunmore has 2 residents and a PA in Bay 3. She's fine." Elara pressed the paper towels against the spill with the flat of her palm. "I'll be out in 4 minutes." Schaefer turned around then. He looked at her the way he looked at a lot of things in that hospital. Like the problem wasn't the situation, it was that the situation involved someone below him having an opinion. He was 48. He had published research. He had plaques. He spoke at conferences where other doctors nodded along with whatever he said, because it was easier than disagreement. "You know what your problem is?" he said. Elara didn't answer. "You have no sense of urgency. You move like you're sleepwalking. You've been here 3 years and you're still making break room coffee like you're on vacation. A nurse with your—" he gestured vaguely at her. "Background should have moved into a supervisory role by now. The fact that you haven't tells me something." "What does it tell you?" "That you don't push." Elara stood. She threw the soaked paper towels in the trash. She washed her hands at the small sink, dried them, and turned to face him. She was a full head shorter than Roman Schaefer, and significantly quieter, and she had a way of making eye contact that made some people feel, without quite knowing why, like they were being measured. "I push where it counts," she said. She walked out of the break room. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, Schaefer had filed a behavioral note in her personnel file. Insubordination during shift coordination, that HR would later classify as an informal flag, which in practical terms meant nothing, but in emotional terms meant that someone who had already been carrying a heavy and invisible weight now had an official document suggesting she deserved it. Elara didn't know about the note until Friday morning, when her direct supervisor, charge nurse Patrice Wynn, pulled her aside near the medication cart with the apologetic expression of someone delivering bad news they personally didn't agree with. "Roman asked me to formalize it," Patrice said quietly. "I told him it was excessive." "It's fine." "It's not fine. He knocked over your cup and then filed on you for—" "Patrice," Elara looked at her, "is there anything actionable here? Anything that changes my shift, my duties, my license?" "No." "Then it's fine." Patrice studied her for a moment. "You know, most people in your position would be angrier." "Most people in my position would have quit already," Elara said, and pushed the medication cart toward room 7. What Patrice didn't know What none of them knew was that Elara Voss had spent the previous 4 years actively engineering a life that was small on purpose. Small city, small role, small apartment with one window that faced a parking garage instead of the street, which she had specifically requested because she didn't want to be able to see people coming from a distance and feel the old reflex kick in. Small social footprint, no social media. A phone registered to an address 2 states over that she updated every 18 months. She had earned the right to be invisible, in a way most people would never understand and she would never explain. Before Caldwell City, before Mercy Ridge General and the night shift and Roman Schaefer's particular brand of exhausting authority. Before the paperbacks and the break room and the 4-year accumulation of small indignities, she had decided to simply absorb rather than correct. There had been another life. She didn't think about it by choice, but the body remembers things the mind tries to set down. When a trauma gurney came through those ER doors at speed, her hands would steady before her brain caught up. When a patient's pressure dropped faster than the monitors were recording, she would already be adjusting before the alert fired. When someone was coding in Bay 2 and the residents were cycling through panic, she was the still point in the room. The voice that didn't rise, the hands that didn't shake. She had been trained in conditions that most of these doctors had only read about in journals. She had chosen this quiet life because the alternative had cost her everything. She wasn't ready to revisit the cost. The shift on Friday night started the way most Friday nights started at Mercy Ridge. Loud, fractured, understaffed, and running 3 critical patients simultaneously before 9 o'clock had fully arrived. Elara moved through the organized chaos the way she always did, efficiently, without drawing attention, checking in on the residents who needed steadying without making them feel steadied. She liked the night shift. She liked the specific quality of focus it demanded, the way it narrowed everything to the immediate. No politics at 2 in the morning, just the work. She was checking a drip line in Bay 4 when she heard the radio crackle at the main station. EMS incoming. Teenage male. Multiple stab wounds, suspected blade to the torso, GCS declining, ETA 4 minutes. She was already moving toward the trauma bay when Schaefer's voice cut across the floor. "I've got this. Residents on Bay 6, Dunmore covers 4. Voss?" He didn't look at her. "Stay on the floor." She stopped. "I can assist in trauma." I said, "Stay on the floor." He pulled on gloves without breaking stride. "You're a floor nurse, not a trauma assist." "My certification is not the conversation we're having right now." He pushed through the trauma bay doors. Elara stood in the corridor for 3 seconds. Then she followed him in. The boy was 15 years old. Later she would learn his name was Marcus Webb, that he played baseball, that his mother would not stop crying for 6 hours straight in the family waiting room, that he had been walking home from a friend's house and had taken a wrong turn into a confrontation that had nothing to do with him. But in the moment he came through those doors, he was just a patient, pale, lips going gray, breathing in the shallow, compensatory rhythm of someone whose body was fighting to preserve itself and losing the argument. Schaefer assessed him fast and loud, the way he always worked, calling out orders, positioning residents, controlling the room by volume. He was good. She had to give him that. He was genuinely good under pressure, quick with a needle, decisive with triage. If the injury had been what he thought it was, he would have had this kid stabilized in 6 minutes. But it wasn't what he thought it was. Elara stepped beside the gurney. She looked at the boy's neck. The jugular veins were distended, barely. A millimeter of abnormal pressure against the skin, the kind of detail that got lost in the noise of a busy trauma bay. "His neck veins," she said. Schaefer didn't stop moving. "I see them. They're distended. He's got muffled heart sounds and his pressure's dropping faster than the bleed accounts for. I'm aware of Beck's triad. Thank you. Are you doing a pericardiocentesis?" He stopped, looked at her. The residents looked at her. The bay went just slightly quieter. "What I'm doing," Schaefer said, with the careful enunciation of a man who is furious and choosing not to show it in front of an audience, "is managing a trauma patient. What you're doing is standing in my trauma bay without authorization." The monitor screamed, pressure, 74/40 and dropping. Elara looked at the screen. looked at the boy, looked at Schaefer. "Cardiac tamponade," she said. "He has blood around his heart. If you don't drain it in the next 2 minutes, you'll lose him." One of the residents, a young woman named Dr. Aiko Sato, who had been at Mercy Ridge for 4 months and was still learning which battles to pick, said very quietly, "The neck veins, Dr. Schaefer. She's right about the presentation." The monitor screamed again. Schaefer stood there for 1 more second, the longest second in that room. Then he moved. "Pericardiocentesis kit. Now!" It took 90 seconds. The pressure line began climbing before they'd fully withdrawn the needle. The boy's lips went from gray to pale to something approaching pink. His breathing changed. His eyes, which had been going distant, came back. Nobody in that room said anything for a long moment. Then Schaefer turned to Elara. She expected nothing from him. She had expected nothing from him for 3 years. She was already calculating her exit from the bay, already composing the incident report she'd need to file for entering the trauma bay without authorization, already preparing for the follow-up from HR that would come Monday morning. "You were right," Schaefer said. It came out like it cost him something, like the words had been stored somewhere behind his sternum and releasing them caused a physical ache. Elara looked at him. "The boy needed the procedure." "Yes." He stripped off his gloves. His voice had dropped to something that wasn't quite human, or wasn't quite the version of human he usually performed. "That's all I'm saying." He turned and walked out. Elara looked at the boy. His chest was rising and falling in a regular rhythm. Dr. Sato caught her eye and gave her a nod that said more than words would have covered. Elara nodded back, pulled off her own gloves, walked out of the bay. She was writing the incident report at 2:17 a.m. when the windows rattled. It was a subtle thing at first, a vibration in the glass that could have been a large truck on the street below, or a wind shift, or something in the building's mechanical system. She paused, looked up, and the sound that followed was not subtle at all. Rotors. Heavy military-grade rotors, the kind she had not heard in 4 years and her body recognized before her mind finished processing. She was on her feet before she consciously decided to stand. The first shout came from the ER entrance. "Clear the floor! Everybody back!" The double doors burst open with the kind of authority that didn't come from regular hospital security. 3 figures in tactical gear swept in, weapons at retention, moving in a controlled pattern that was not aggressive but was absolutely non-negotiable. Behind them, 2 more. Behind those 2, a woman in a military dress uniform, Army, Colonel's insignia, who scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of someone conducting an assessment, not an entrance. The ER froze. 40 seconds ago, this floor had been a controlled chaos of nurses, residents, and overnight patients. Now it was a held breath. "We're looking for a civilian employee registered under the name Voss," the colonel said. Her voice carried without being raised. "Elara Voss, it's urgent." Schaefer appeared from around the corner. He was still in his trauma gloves, still carrying the particular energy of a man who had just been proven wrong and hadn't finished processing it. He looked at the military personnel with the expression of someone who was accustomed to being the most important person in any given room and was suddenly unsure if that was still true. "This is a hospital," he said. "You can't just—" "Sir." The colonel looked at him without hostility and without negotiation. "We are not here for the hospital. We're here for Voss." Elara had stopped 6 feet from the nurse's station. She was holding an incident report form. Her pen was still in her hand. Every face in that ER turned toward her. She knew this moment. She had known, on some level, that a version of this moment was always possible. That you could run from a history as long and as hard as you wanted, but some histories ran faster. She set the incident report on the counter. The colonel saw her. Something passed across the woman's face. Relief, maybe, or the particular expression of someone who had been given a very difficult assignment and was now watching it become slightly less impossible. "Major Voss," she said. The break room, the spilled coffee, the behavioral note in her file. 3 years of being the quiet woman in scrubs who read paperbacks on breaks and didn't push. Schaefer was staring at her. "Major?" he said. Elara looked at him. Something in her posture had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that was easy to describe. She hadn't suddenly grown taller or colder. She was still the same woman, but the way she was standing occupied the room differently than it had 60 seconds ago. "You asked me once what my background was," she said to him. He stared. "I used to work somewhere else," she said, "before I came here." The colonel took 2 steps forward. "We have a Black Hawk on the roof. We need to move now. It's a medical emergency. Classified. You're the only one who can help." "Who's the patient?" Elara asked. "I'll explain in transit. Tell me now." The colonel held her gaze. 4 seconds passed. "Director Harlan Vance, Deputy Chief of Operations, Defense Intelligence. He was shot 2 hours ago. Our surgical team has been working him for 90 minutes, and they can't stabilize the bleed. There's a procedure." "Stop." Elara's voice was quiet. "I know the procedure. You wrote it." A long silence. She looked down at the pen she was still holding. She set it on the counter next to the incident report. She looked at Patrice Wynne, who was standing near the medication station with an expression that said she was revising everything she thought she'd understood about the woman she'd worked beside for 3 years. "Tell OR we're prepping for a level 1, Elara said to her. "Marcus Webb may need a follow-up drain. Watch his pressure every 20. Elara, "Ooh. He's 15, she said. "Just watch his pressure." She walked toward the doors. Schaefer stepped back, not out of ceremony, more like his body made the decision before his ego could overrule it. "Who are you?" he said. She passed him without breaking stride. "I told you," she said. "Same person I've always been." She stepped through the double doors and into the corridor, the colonel moving ahead of her, the tactical team falling into position around her with the easy precision of people who had practiced this 1,000 times. And the rotor wash from the Black Hawk on the roof hit her before she even reached the stairwell. It felt, against all reason, familiar. Behind her, in the ER of Mercy Ridge General, nobody moved for a long time. Roman Schaefer stood in the middle of the floor with his trauma gloves still on, and the particular expression of a man who had spent years cataloging a colleague's insignificance and was now abruptly aware of how wrong the catalog had been. Patrice Wynne walked slowly to the nurse's station. She picked up the incident report Elara had been writing, the one about entering the trauma bay without authorization, the one Elara had started filing on herself. And she looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the doors. Then she folded the report in half and put it in her pocket. The Black Hawk lifted off the roof of Mercy Ridge General at 2:34 a.m. Inside, it was loud in the way military aircraft were always loud, the kind of noise that required earpieces and made conversation and negotiation with the rotors. The colonel, her name was Reyes, she said over the headset. Colonel Dana Reyes, Army Medical Intelligence, had a tablet open with footage that Elara couldn't fully read from the angle she was sitting, but the timestamp was 2 hours ago, and the location was listed as a classified installation 40 minutes northeast of Caldwell City. "He was exiting a briefing when the shot came," Reyes said. "Single round, long range. The shooter knew the route." "Penetrating or through and through?" "Penetrating. Upper right thoracic region. Our surgeons located the primary bleed, but there's a secondary hemorrhage they can't control. It's originating from the mediastinum, near the posterior pericardium, and every time they attempt access, they're losing pressure faster than they can compensate." Elara was quiet for a moment. "How long has he been open?" 93 minutes. "What's his pressure?" "Last reading before I boarded was 68 systolic. They're pushing blood and holding the bleed manually, but they can't maintain it and attempt the repair simultaneously. They need the retrosternal access approach. They don't know it." "I know they don't know it." She looked out the window. Caldwell City's lights were pulling away beneath them, the grid of streets going small and abstract below the rotors. It was never formally published. The full procedure was written up in a classified clinical summary in 2019 and filed with the Defense Medical Research Office. "We know," Reyes said. "You're the only person who's ever performed it." The helicopter banked left. Elara adjusted her weight automatically, the old muscle memory of 100 transports in conditions that made this one look like a commute. "Who approved this?" she said. "What?" "Who authorized pulling a civilian employee from a hospital in the middle of a shift? That's not a field decision. Somebody signed off on this above your level." Reyes met her eyes. Director Vance signed the authorization before the surgery began. He authorized his own medical rescue? He was coherent when he arrived. He was very specific. Reyes paused. He asked for you by name. Elara said nothing. Below them, Caldwell City disappeared into the dark. She hadn't been in a classified facility for 4 years. The moment she stepped through the reinforced entrance of the installation, no designation visible, nothing on the exterior that identified it as anything other than a nondescript government building set into the side of a wooded ridge. The sensory memory hit her with an almost physical force, the specific quality of filtered air in a sealed facility, the particular fluorescent lighting calibrated to full-spectrum visibility, the sound of secure doors cycling, the way every person in the corridor moved with the contained energy of someone who carried clearance as a weight, not a badge. She'd spent years learning to forget this feeling. A surgical team met her at the corridor junction. 2 surgeons, a perfusionist, a scrub technician, and an anesthesiologist who looked like he hadn't slept in 30 hours and was functioning on the specific kind of focused exhaustion she recognized from forward operating environments. "Walk me through what you've done," she said. The lead surgeon, a thin man named Okafor, who had the dark, steady eyes of someone in the back half of a very bad night, laid it out quickly and without embellishment. He was good. She could tell immediately that he was good, that the limitation here wasn't his skill but the specific nature of what the bullet had done and what knowledge he didn't have. "You've been holding the mediastinal bleed manually," she said. 22 minutes. "Who's holding it?" "Dr. Park, resident. She has good hands." "Okay." Elara stopped walking. "I need 2 minutes to scrub. I need the retrosternal access kit. It may not be labeled that. Look for a thoracic specialties tray with a Harrington retractor set and a modified Metzenbaum. I need the field briefed exactly once before I open, and then silence unless I ask for something. Is that clear?" Okafor looked at her. He was a senior military surgeon. He had operated in theaters she had never seen. He had probably never in his career been given instructions by a woman in civilian scrubs who had arrived on a helicopter 40 minutes ago. "Clear," he said. She scrubbed in. The operating room was cold and white and very quiet. Harlan Vance was on the table with his chest open and his color bad, and a resident with excellent hands holding a bleed in place by the sustained pressure of trained fingers on living tissue. He was 61 years old. She knew that from the chart. She knew other things about him that weren't in the chart, things that existed in the part of her memory she had been carefully not visiting for 4 years. But this was not the moment for any of that. This was the work. "Dr. Park," she said, moving to the table, "keep exactly the pressure you have. Don't adjust. Don't compensate for my entry. When I tell you to release, release clean and fast. Not before." The resident, young, dark-haired, absolutely steady, said, "Understood." Elara looked at this field. The posterior pericardium, the originating bleed point, the angle of approach that Okafor had been unable to safely achieve because he hadn't known to access from below the sternum rather than lateral. She picked up the retractor. "Pressure?" she said. 64 systolic. She moved. The procedure took 41 minutes. It was not elegant. She had performed it 3 times before, twice in field conditions that made elegant an impossible standard, and once in a trauma bay where the power had failed halfway through and they'd finished under flashlights held by junior medics. She knew every point where it could go wrong, and she had learned each of those points the hard way, in the field, under conditions that she was not thinking about right now. At minute 17, the pressure dropped to 54, and the anesthesiologist called it out in a voice that was very controlled and very urgent, and she said, "Hold steady," without looking up, and she meant it, and the room held. At minute 29, the suture line she was building across the posterior pericardial tear held its first test pressure, and she felt, in the deep and private center of her concentration, the specific relief of a thing going right. At minute 38, she said, "Release, Dr. Park." The resident released, clean and fast, exactly as instructed. The bleed did not resume. At minute 41, she stepped back. The monitors were steady. The pressure was climbing, 82 systolic, then 89, then 94. Not normal, not out of danger, but climbing. Okafor looked at her across the table. She didn't say anything. She set down the instrument she was holding and looked at the field and let herself, for exactly 3 seconds, be the person who had just done a difficult thing successfully. Then she stripped off her outer glove and turned to the scrub technician. "Get me a fresh pair," she said, "and someone start his post-op protocol. He's going to need pressure monitoring every 4 minutes for the next hour." "Should we?" Okafor started. "Should we what?" "I don't know your name." She looked at him. "Voss." He nodded slowly with the expression of someone who had just watched something they hadn't fully understood and wasn't sure yet how to classify it. "Dr. Voss. Just Voss. Thank you." She looked back at the table. Harlan Vance was breathing on a ventilator with a blood pressure that was going to save his life. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "He's not out of the woods." But she knew, with the certainty that came from years of reading bodies in crisis, that he was going to make it. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, what would only begin to surface in the hours that followed, as Vance's blood pressure stabilized and his sedation lightened and the facility's security team began quietly reviewing the events of the past 12 hours, was that the bullet that had nearly killed him was not a random thing. It was a message. And the person who had sent it was not finished. At 4:18 a.m., while Harlan Vance was being moved from the operating room to a secured recovery suite, and while Elara Voss was sitting in a scrub room drinking bad coffee from a paper cup and feeling the specific kind of emptiness that follows sustained intensity, a security officer knocked on the door. "Ma'am," he said. She looked up. His face was careful in the way that faces get careful when they are carrying information they've been told to deliver neutrally. "We've identified the rifle position," he said. "Long range, approximately 800 meters, single shooter." "Okay." "The ballistics team found a shell casing at the position." "Okay." He paused. "It matches a ballistic signature on file." Elara went still. "On file from what?" she said. The officer looked at his tablet, then at her. "From an incident 4 years ago," he said. "Classified. The file is flagged at the directorate level. I'm not cleared for the full designation, but the reference number in the system is Operation Graywire," she said. He looked up. "That's the reference number," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." She set down the paper cup. The coffee had gone cold anyway. Outside the scrub room, somewhere in the secured corridor of this facility that no map acknowledged, something was moving that she had spent 4 years trying to believe was finished. It wasn't finished. It had never been finished. And somewhere in this building, she felt it, the old reflex, the awareness that had kept her alive in places worse than this, somewhere close. Something was very, very wrong. She sat with that for a moment, just sat with it. Operation Graywire, a name she had spent 4 years trying to bury under the accumulated weight of night shifts and paperback novels, and the small, deliberate routines of a life built to be forgettable. She had been mostly successful. She had gotten very good at not thinking about it. Not the way a person forgets something, but the way a person learns to walk around a wound that hasn't healed, careful and practiced, keeping the pressure off. Now someone had fired the same rifle. The security officer was still standing in the doorway. He was young, mid-20s, she guessed, the kind of young that hadn't yet learned how to be comfortable in a room where the senior person was thinking hard and not speaking. He shifted his weight. He looked at his tablet again. "Ma'am, do you want me to—" "Get Colonel Reyes," Elara said. "Right now. Tell her I need a full Graywire file pull, whatever's accessible at this installation." "I'm not sure I have authorization to—" "Tell her I said Graywire. She'll move." He left. Elara stood. She threw the paper cup in the trash and stood in the middle of the scrub room and let herself think the things she had been not thinking for 4 years. 12 people. Her unit. Forward Medical Operations Team, classified designation, attached to an intelligence mission that was supposed to be an extraction. 1 asset, 1 location, 40 minutes on the ground. It had gone wrong in the specific way that missions go wrong when the information going in is not what it claims to be. They had been on the ground for 11 minutes when the perimeter collapsed. Not because of bad luck, not because of poor planning, because someone had told the wrong people they were coming. She had survived by accident, a timing thing. She had been 20 meters from the primary position, checking a supply pack that had come loose during insertion when the first shot came. The positioning that saved her life was the same positioning that meant she couldn't save any of theirs. She had spent 4 years being unable to decide if she was a survivor or a witness. Now someone was using the same shooter, which meant either the same weapon, extremely specific, or the same person, which meant it wasn't over, which meant whoever had set up Greywire was still operational and still worried about something. The only question was what? Colonel Reyes arrived in 4 minutes, which told Elara the name had landed the way she expected. The colonel came through the scrub room door with a tablet already in hand and the expression of someone who had just been forced to sprint through a classification review. "How do you know about the ballistic match?" Reyes said. "Your officer told me." "He shouldn't have. He was being thorough. Don't punish him for it." Elara looked at the tablet. "What do you have on Greywire?" "It's flagged at directorate level. I can access a redacted summary, but the operational specifics are locked behind." "Who locked them?" Reyes hesitated. 1 beat too long. "Reyes." "The file closure was authorized by the Deputy Directorate," Reyes said. "Standard post-operation review. The mission was classified as a failed extraction with casualties attributed to compromised field intelligence. No disciplinary action, no surviving personnel disciplined. The file was closed." "Who signed the closure?" Another pause. "Deputy Director Elliot Karn," Reyes said. Elara went very still. Elliot Karn, senior official, 23 years in the Intelligence Directorate. The kind of man who attended congressional briefings and gave measured, careful answers to carefully worded questions and had a reputation for operational caution that everyone in the agency described as a virtue. She had met him once, 4 years ago, 3 weeks after Greywire. He had sat across from her in a debrief room that smelled like recycled air and told her, in the patient and sorrowful voice of a man who had practiced this particular conversation, that the mission had been lost due to a cascade of field intelligence failures that were being reviewed at the highest level, and that the sacrifice of her unit would be honored, and that she was being offered a medical separation with full benefits and a civilian placement program. She had not said much. She had been in the part of grief that doesn't perform. She had accepted the separation. She had taken the placement program and used it to disappear into Caldwell City and a night shift at Mercy Ridge General. "Is Karn in this building?" she said. "What?" "Elliot Karn, is he here?" "He has no reason to be here. This is a field installation, not—" "Someone told the shooter Vance's route tonight. Someone with access to his schedule and his security detail's movement pattern." Elara looked at Reyes directly. "That's not a field-level leak. That's directorate-level information." Reyes said nothing. "Does Carney know Vance was brought here?" "Standard protocol would require—" Reyes stopped. Started again. "Directorate leadership is notified of significant personnel medical events, yes." "So he knows?" "Yes. And the shooter is using a weapon that matches Greywire ballistics." Reyes's expression had shifted into something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite certainty. It was the look of someone running numbers in their head and not loving the answer. "I need you to secure this installation," Elara said. "Lock the access points, restrict movement to essential personnel, and I need eyes on every entrance, including the service corridors. Right now. I can't initiate a lockdown based on—" "Harlan Vance nearly died tonight from a bullet fired by the same weapon that killed 12 people 4 years ago, and the man who signed that incident closed is in the notification chain for Vance's location. That's your threat picture. Does it need to be bigger before you move?" Reyes looked at her. "I'll initiate a security review," she said. "Lockdown." "A security review, Voss. I'm not triggering a full lockdown on a classified installation based on a ballistic match and a theory. I need more than—" The facility lights went out. Not all of them. The emergency lighting kicked in immediately. Red-tinted, lower than normal, the specific quality of light that exists in contingency planning and nowhere else. But the primary system dropped, and in the 2 seconds between darkness and emergency lighting, every secure door in the installation defaulted to its fail-safe state. Some locked, some unlocked. The security system defaulted to unlock on the wing housing the recovery suite. Elara was through the scrub room door before Reyes finished her sentence. The corridor was wrong, in the specific way that corridors are wrong when the power structure of a building has been altered. The sounds were different. The personnel moving through the emergency lighting were moving with purpose that had shifted from routine to reactive. She passed 2 security officers heading toward the main power junction. She passed a technician who looked lost. She moved in the direction of the recovery suite because that was where Vance was, and Vance was why someone had cut the power. She hit the recovery suite corridor at a jog. The door was open. She stopped. The door was open, and the security officer who had been posted outside it was on the floor, and he was breathing. She could see the rise and fall of his chest in the emergency lighting, but he was not conscious. Something fast and blunt had happened to him while the lights were transitioning. Elara entered the room. Vance was on the bed, still intubated, still on the ventilator, monitors running on battery backup. His pressure was holding. She checked it by reflex, the number reading 96 systolic on the backup display. Stable. He was sedated. He had no idea that the door to his room had just been standing open. She looked around the room, checked the corners, checked the small attached bathroom, checked the window. Sealed, as all windows in classified facilities were sealed, non-operable and reinforced. Nobody here, but somebody had opened this door. And somebody had put the security officer on the floor, and whoever that was had then not been here, which meant either they had come to look and retreated, or they had come for something else and found it. She went back to the officer in the corridor, knelt beside him. His pulse was strong. No blood. He'd been struck across the back of the head. Clean, controlled, professional. Not a panicked hit, a practiced one. She looked both ways down the corridor. The emergency lighting threw everything into the same flat red. Shadows pooled at the junctions. 40 meters to her left, something moved. Not dramatically, just the particular quality of movement in a corridor that is supposed to be empty. A shadow that adjusted when it shouldn't have. A pressure change in the air that comes from a door recently passed through. She stood. She had no weapon. She was in scrubs. She had arrived here on a helicopter 2 hours ago, carrying nothing but the skills in her hands and the knowledge in her head. She moved left. The junction split into 3 directions. North toward the facility's main access, east toward the technical operations rooms, and down a stairwell that descended to what the facility schematics, which she had studied in the helicopter with the same automatic thoroughness she brought to everything, designated as sub-level storage and utilities. The stairwell door was not quite latched. She pushed it open and listened. Footsteps below, unhurried. Someone moving through sub-level with familiarity, not urgency, which was somehow worse. She descended. The stairwell was poorly lit, even on full power. Emergency lighting down here was functional but dim. The kind of dim that required adaptation. She moved quietly. She had a talent for quiet that was not a personality trait but a trained behavior, something built into her movement patterns over years in environments where quiet was operational, not optional. The sublevel smelled like concrete and old ventilation. It was a service corridor, pipes along the ceiling, storage units on both sides, the mechanical infrastructure of a facility that was meant to be invisible. The footsteps had stopped. She moved through the first junction. A hand came out of the dark and caught her wrist. She was already moving before the grip fully closed. Her body had registered the incoming contact a fraction of a second before it happened. The same instinct that had saved her 11 minutes into Operation Graywire. The same instinct she had spent 4 years thinking she was letting go rusty. It wasn't rusty. She had the arm redirected and the person off balance before the grip became a hold. In the pale emergency lighting, she had enough to make out the shape of a man, older, her height, in what appeared to be civilian clothes, who raised his free hand immediately in a gesture that every body language system in the world reads the same way. "Voss," the man said. "It's me." She held the redirect, didn't release. "I don't know who you are," she said. "Yes, you do." The man turned his face toward the nearest light source. "You just haven't seen me in 4 years." She looked at him. 61 years old, gray at the temples, a face that belonged on the monitors in the recovery suite upstairs, sedated and intubated and nowhere near a sub-level corridor. Harlan Vance was standing in the dark in a hospital gown with a drainage tube taped to his side, and the look of a man who had made a decision he was aware was medically terrible and was prepared to defend it anyway. "You're supposed to be sedated," she said. "I have a high metabolic rate." He coughed, a tight, wet sound that told her exactly how much pain he was in and how completely he was ignoring it. "I've been reducing my own sedation for the last 40 minutes. I needed to be awake." "You needed to stay on the ventilator." "I know what I need, Voss. I also know what's in this building." He looked at her steadily. "How much did they tell you?" "About Graywire." "About Graywire. About tonight. About what's actually happening. Tell me." He leaned against the corridor wall, and she could see what it cost him to stay upright. The surgery had been 41 minutes of controlled trauma to his thoracic cavity. He was running on adrenaline and will, and whatever biochemical stubbornness had kept him alive long enough to reach the table, and both of them knew it. "The shooter tonight wasn't a message," he said. "They were an answer. Someone found out I had pulled Graywire." "You pulled the file?" 3 weeks ago. I've been building a case for 2 years. Quiet, off-channel, nothing on the official systems. I found inconsistencies in the original debrief records, timing discrepancies, communication logs that had been altered retroactively. He paused to breathe. "Someone in the directorate knew your team was going in, not from a field intelligence failure, from a deliberate disclosure." "I know that," she said. "I know you know. That's why I asked for you specifically." He met her eyes. "Because you're the only surviving member of that team, and because you never stopped being dangerous, and because whoever did this has been banking on the assumption that you would stay disappeared." "Who is it?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Carney," she said. His expression answered before his words did. "You got there fast." His name came up in the file closure. "He was in the notification chain for your location tonight, and someone with directorate access cut the power to this facility 20 minutes ago and went to your room." She paused. "Except you weren't in it." "I had a feeling," Vance said simply. "You had a feeling, so you pulled your own drainage tube and walked down 3 flights of stairs in a hospital gown." "The tube is still in. I just disconnected the external line." He looked almost apologetic. "I've had field surgery before." She looked at him. "You're going to do real damage to the repair if you don't." "I'll lie down in 30 minutes. I just needed to find you first." "Why?" "Because Carney is in this building," he said. The corridor went very quiet. "He arrived 20 minutes before the power cut," Vance continued. "Directorate protocol. Senior personnel can access field installations during medical emergencies involving directorate staff. It's completely standard, which means he's here legitimately, and there's nothing anyone can do to remove him unless we can prove. Where is he now?" "Last I knew, he was in the operations center with Reyes, expressing concern, offering resources." He said the last 2 words with a flatness that carried everything. "He's very good at this. He's been very good at this for a long time." Elara thought about the recovery suite, the unconscious officer, the open door, the practiced, professional quality of whatever had been done to that man. "Did Carney come alone?" she said. Vance's face tightened. "He came with an aide," he said. "Single individual, male, mid-40s, listed as a senior analyst on his staff manifest." "Does the aide have a name?" "Filed under a pseudonym. The cover designation in the entry log is Marsh K." She waited. "But I ran his biometrics through the system 2 weeks ago when I first identified him on Carney's staff," Vance said. "His real name in the classified personnel database is Dmitry Volkov. He's been operating under directorate cover for 3 years." She said nothing. "Do you know that name?" Vance asked. She knew the name. She knew it the way you know the name of a thing that has lived in the back of your nightmares for 4 years without ever quite surfacing. She knew it because in the aftermath of Graywire, in the long fragmented process of reconstructing what had happened from the wreckage of mission logs and her own incomplete memory, she had found a pattern in the timing of the perimeter collapse that pointed to someone on the ground, someone who had been positioned to trigger the disclosure at the exact right moment, someone with precision, with patience, with the kind of operational discipline that doesn't come from intelligence desk work. "He was there," she said. "During Graywire, he was physically on the ground. Yes. He was the trigger. Yes. Vance paused. And he's the one who went to my room tonight. The weight of that settled into the corridor between them. Elara looked at the stairwell they had both come down. Somewhere above them, Elliot Karn was standing in the operations center being solicitous and useful and expressing grave concern for the welfare of a man he had tried to have killed. Somewhere in this facility, Volkov was moving. She didn't know where. She didn't know what his next objective was. She knew he was professional. She knew he had just found an empty recovery suite. And she knew that when a professional finds the target missing, they don't panic. They reassess and continue. "Can you get upstairs?" she said to Vance. "If you move slowly." "We can't move slowly." He pushed off the wall. He was gritting his teeth in a way he was trying to make look like a neutral expression and not quite succeeding. "Then I'll keep up. There's an officer down on the recovery corridor. We need to get you back to the suite. Get that door secured and get Reyes away from Carne without Carne knowing she's been moved." "And Volkov?" She looked down the corridor in the direction the movement had gone before Vance had caught her wrist. "Volkov is a problem I'm going to handle," she said. "By yourself. It wouldn't be the first time I've handled a problem by myself in the dark." He looked at her with the expression of a man who wanted to argue and knew he didn't have the standing. "You should know," he said, "that whatever happened 4 years ago, the way the debrief was managed, the way you were handled, the way the file was closed, that wasn't my operation. I was lateral to Greywire. I didn't know until 2 years ago." She looked at him. "I know." "I'm not sure you do." "I know you pulled the file," she said. "I know you've been building a case, and I know that someone shot you tonight because you were close to finishing it. That's enough for right now." She moved to the stairwell. "Come on, stay behind me and don't make noise." They went up. The recovery suite corridor was exactly as she had left it. The officer still on the floor, the room still with its door hanging open, the red emergency lighting making everything look like it was happening at the bottom of something. She moved Vance through the door first, checked the room again, checked the bathroom again, and then stood in the doorway while Vance lowered himself back onto the bed with the specific controlled movement of a man who is refusing to admit how much it hurt. "The drainage line," she said. "I know." He reconnected it himself. His hands were steady, which she respected. She looked at the corridor, still empty. The officer's chest was still rising and falling. "Stay here," she said to Vance. "Don't move. Don't open that door for anyone except Reyes or me. If someone else comes through, you scream loud enough that the whole floor hears it." "I'm not going to scream." "Harlan." She looked at him. "You just survived a surgery that you had maybe a 15% chance of walking out of. You are not in a position to fight anyone tonight. You scream." He held her gaze. Then, "Fine." "Thank you." She pulled the recovery suite door closed behind her. The emergency lighting was still running. The main power had not come back, which meant either the technical team hadn't found the fault yet, or the fault was not a fault. It was a deliberate cut that was being maintained. She needed Reyes. She turned north toward the operations center. She had taken 4 steps when she heard the sound. It came from the east corridor, the direction of the technical operations rooms. And it was not a loud sound. It was the specific quiet sound of a door being opened by someone who was trying not to make noise. In a facility running on emergency power with the kind of background hum that normal operations generate, that sound was barely audible. In a facility this quiet, at 5 a.m., with the background hum reduced to the minimal draw of battery-backed systems, it was clear enough to hear from 40 meters. She stopped. She turned east. The door at the end of the east corridor was just settling closed. She moved toward it. Behind her, 40 meters away, in the north corridor leading to the operations center, Elliot Karn stepped out of the operations center door and looked in her direction. She didn't see him. She was already moving east. He watched her go. Then he took out his phone. Not a standard-issue device, not a facility-networked handset, but a personal encrypted unit that operated independently of the installation's communication system. And he sent a single message that contained 4 words. "She's in the east wing." The response came back in 11 seconds. "Understood. In position." The east corridor was 30 meters of bare concrete and low red light, and Elara moved through it the way she moved through everything in the last 2 hours. fast enough to close distance, slow enough to hear what was ahead of her. The door at the end was labeled Technical Operations, Restricted Access. It was a heavy door, the kind with a magnetic lock that under normal power would require a keycard and a pin. Under emergency power, the facility's failsafe had defaulted it to unlocked. Whoever had designed that protocol had been thinking about evacuation, not infiltration. She pushed it open with her shoulder and went through low. The room was large and dark except for the glow of monitors on battery backup. 6 screens running on minimal power, casting pale blue light across workstations and server racks. It smelled like electronics and recycled air, the kind of room that is never comfortable and never meant to be. She cleared the right side first, then the left. Nobody. She stood in the center of the room and listened. The sound that had drawn her here, that specific careful closing of a door, had come from this direction. But Technical Operations was empty, which meant either she had been wrong about the direction or whoever had come through this door had already moved on through the far exit on the opposite wall. She crossed the room and checked the far door. Unlatched. Recently. She went through. The room beyond was smaller, a secondary server space, half the size of the main room, with rack-mounted hardware along both walls and a narrow central aisle. At the far end of the aisle, a man was crouched in front of an open panel, working quickly by the light of a small, penlight-sized LED torch clenched between his teeth. He heard her the moment she came through the door. She knew he heard her because his body registered it. A fractional stillness, half a second, the kind that a person who has been trained to move through the world without being heard produces when they realize they have been. He didn't look up immediately. He finished the movement his hands were already making. Then he straightened and turned. Mid-40s, compact build, a face that was ordinary in a deliberate way, the kind of face that had been trained to be forgettable. He was holding a small device in his right hand, circuit board thin, no larger than a deck of cards. And his expression was not the expression of someone caught. It was the expression of someone who had been expecting this and was now deciding which version of what came next to run. Voss, Volkov said. His accent was minimal, the kind that comes from years of deliberate erosion. You're faster than I expected. What did you just install? He looked at the device in his hand. Communications intercept. Passive. It's been feeding this facility's internal network traffic to an external relay for the last 11 minutes. He said it the way someone explained something obvious to someone who asked anyway. Everything Reyes and her team has communicated since the power cut has been routed through it. So Carne knows what Reyes knows. Carne knew what Reyes knew 20 minutes before you finished Vance's surgery. He tilted his head slightly. You did good work in there, by the way. I've read the procedure. It's genuinely elegant. Take the device out. No. She looked at him. He was not holding a weapon. His hands were visible. He was also standing in a room with one exit, which was behind her, and he was completely relaxed, which was the part that concerned her most. A professional who is cornered and relaxed is not cornered. He's waiting. You're not going to rush me, he said, reading her, because you don't know what I have on me and you're calculating odds without enough information. That's correct. That's smart. He set the device on the server rack beside him. I'm not here to fight you. You put a security officer on the floor 20 minutes ago. He's fine. Controlled strike, minimal concussion. He'll be awake in an hour. He paused. I needed access to Vance's suite, and I needed it quiet. He wasn't there. No, Volkov said. He wasn't. Something crossed his face that might have been the ghost of genuine surprise. He's more resilient than the files suggested. You shot him. I did. The flatness of it, no justification, no performance, just confirmation, was more disturbing than anything defensive would have been. And gray wire, she said. That's a longer conversation. We have time. We don't, actually. He glanced toward the ceiling, a quick, practiced glance, the kind that's checking a timeline rather than a physical space. In approximately 6 minutes, the communications intercept I installed will complete its second data transfer. At that point, Carne will have everything he needs to initiate a directorate-level security review that will effectively bury Vance's investigation and have both of us removed from this facility under classification protocols before anyone outside can intervene. Elara processed that. You're telling me this? Yes. Why? He looked at her for a moment. It was a long look, the kind that doesn't come from calculation. Because I was at Greywire, he said. And I have been living inside what Carney built for 4 years, and I am very tired of it. The corridor outside the room was still quiet. The emergency lighting hummed. The server racks ticked with the low-grade heat of machines running on minimum power. You triggered the perimeter collapse, she said. I transmitted the team's position, yes. His voice didn't change. I was told it was a controlled compromise. A limited disclosure to pressure an asset into cooperation. I was told the team would be extracted before any kinetic response. He paused. I was told a lot of things. 12 people died. I know how many people died. You know the number, I knew the people. The silence that followed that was the kind that can't be filled by anything useful. He didn't try to fill it. She gave him credit for that. The device, she said. Remove it now. If I remove it, Carney loses his intercept feed and he knows immediately that something has changed. Volkov looked at her steadily. He will move. He has 2 armed personnel in the facility besides me, and unlike me, they are still operating on his instructions. 2. Entry team. They came in with the advanced security detail. Standard cover. They've been positioned in the facility since 30 minutes before the power cut. He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the server rack beside the intercept device. A key card. West sublevel access. That's where they're staged. She looked at the key card. She looked at him. You're flipping, she said. I'm providing information. That's what flipping is. He didn't answer that. You have approximately 4 minutes before the second transfer completes. If you want to stop it cleanly, you need to physically disconnect the primary server feed at junction panel C. It's marked on the rack behind me. It will cut the intercept without triggering Carney's alert protocol because the signal will look like a power fluctuation, not a deliberate termination. He stepped aside from the rack. Or you can spend the next 4 minutes deciding whether you trust me and lose the window. Elara crossed the room in 6 steps. She passed Volkov close enough to feel the air displacement between them. She did not look away from the rack. Her back was to him for exactly as long as it took to locate panel C. Labeled in small stenciled text, 3rd row, left side. Pull it open and find the main junction feed. She had 4 seconds of vulnerability with her back to a man who had killed 12 people she had known by name. She pulled the junction feed. The intercept device on the rack beside her went dark. She turned around. Volkov was standing exactly where she had left him, hands at his sides, looking at her with the expression of someone who had just watched a test and understood what result it produced. Carney's people, she said. West sublevel. How are they armed? Standard tactical load, sidearms and 1 long rifle between them. The long rifle, is that the gray wire weapon? No, the gray wire weapon is Karn's. He's had it for years, trophy or contingency. I was never sure which. She thought about that. He's had it here tonight. He came here to finish what the shot didn't. She was already moving for the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back at him. Come with me or stay here, she said. But if you come, you're walking into the operations center and telling Reyes everything, out loud, on record. I know. That's a one-way door. I know that too. She held his gaze for another 2 seconds. Then she went through the door, and after a beat she heard his footsteps behind her. Steady, not rushing. The footsteps of a man who has made a decision and is done deliberating. Colonel Reyes was in the operations center with 2 of her staff when the door opened and Elara walked in, followed by a man Reyes visibly recognized from the entry log and whose presence in this room clearly did not compute against the mental picture she had been building. This is Volkov, Elara said. He has information about the gray wire operation and about Carney's activity in this facility tonight. He's going to give you everything. I need you to record it, and I need 2 of your people on the west sublevel now. There are 2 armed individuals staged there operating on Carney's instructions. Reyes stared at her. Where is Carney? Where is he? Elara asked. Reyes looked at her staff. One of them, a young analyst, checked the screen in front of her. He was in Corridor 4 about 8 minutes ago. His access card hasn't been used since. Corridor 4, Elara said. Which direction does that run? North-south. It connects the operations wing to... The analyst stopped, looked at the screen. To the recovery suite. Everything in the room adjusted. Reyes was already reaching for her radio. Get me a team on the recovery suite, right? The radio crackled before she could finish. The voice on the other end was one of the corridor security officers, and what he said in the next 4 seconds restructured the entire situation in a way that nobody in the operations center had prepared for. We have a man down in recovery corridor. Different officer, not the same as before. This one is armed, he's been disarmed, and the recovery suite doors open. Static. The patient is not in the room. Reyes looked at Elara. Vance is mobile, Elara said, and she heard herself say it and knew immediately what it meant. Carne went to the suite and found it empty again. Vance moved. Where would he go? She thought about a 61-year-old man with a freshly repaired thoracic tear and a drainage tube and the specific kind of stubbornness that had gotten him shot and then talked him into walking down 3 flights of stairs at 4 in the morning. She thought about what Vance knew that Carne didn't want to stay knowing. She thought about the one place in a facility like this where a man with that information would go if he needed to make sure it didn't disappear with him. Your secure recording station, she said to Reyes. Where is it? Level 2, East Wing. He's going to the recording station. She was already through the door. Because he knows if he can get his testimony on that system, Carne can't bury it, even if he gets to Vance. She ran. The East Corridor, Level 2, was a direction and a distance she covered in 40 seconds. Behind her, she could hear Reyes on the radio, could hear the facility coming alive around her in the specific way of a situation that has exceeded its initial parameters and is now operating on emergency logic. She hit the stairwell, took the steps 2 at a time, burst through the Level 2 door, and stopped. The secure recording station was 15 meters ahead of her. Its door was open. The light inside was on, not emergency red, but white, because the recording station ran on its own isolated power circuit to ensure continuity of evidence capture. In the white light, she could see 2 people. Harlan Vance was seated at the recording terminal. He had clearly made it here under his own power, which had cost him. He was holding his side with one hand and his color was not good at all. But his other hand was on the keyboard and the recording indicator light was red and live. Elliot Karn was standing behind him. He had a weapon. He had the gray wire weapon. She recognized it by the suppressor profile, by the way Volkov had described it, by the specific and particular weight of the moment. Carne looked up when she appeared in the doorway. He was 60 years old and silver-haired and had the bearing of a man who had spent decades being the most trusted person in every room he occupied, and the expression on his face right now was not the expression of a man who had been caught. It was the expression of a man who was deciding how to finish what he had started. Voss, he said, not surprised, not afraid. I was wondering how long. Step away from him, she said. He's transmitting, Carne said, with the measured tone of a man explaining something unfortunate. 14 years of operational records, gray wire. 3 other operations you don't know about. If that transmission completes, there is no version of the next 24 hours that ends quietly. Good. He looked at her. You don't understand what quiet was protecting. I understand what it buried. 12 soldiers, 12 people, she said, with names, with families, with the reasonable expectation that the operation they were sent into wasn't designed to kill them. His grip on the weapon didn't change. His expression didn't change. He was a man who had made a calculation and arrived at a conclusion, and the conclusion had not yet been revised by anything she had said. The transmission takes 90 seconds to complete, Vance said from the terminal. His voice was thin, but it was steady. I've been talking for 40 of them. Carne moved the weapon. Elara moved. Not toward him. She had no cover, no weapon, and 14 feet of open floor between herself and a man with a suppressed firearm who had made decisions about acceptable casualties before. She moved sideways, hard right, into the doorframe, not to escape but to change his geometry, to force him to choose between the 2 of them, to give Vance the 49 seconds he needed. The weapon tracked her. Don't, Karn said. She looked at him from the doorframe. She had nothing left to threaten him with. No tactical advantage, no weapon, no backup that she could confirm was close enough to matter. She had 47 seconds. You signed the gray wire closure, she said. You buried it. You've been living with it for 4 years. Yes. Was it worth it? Something moved across his face, just briefly. Something that was not quite guilt and not quite regret, but was in the same neighborhood as both. The specific expression of a man who had answered that question privately many times and had always arrived at yes, and was beginning, for the first time, to be less certain. Step away from the door, he said. No. His finger moved. And then the stairwell behind her exploded with sound. Boots on concrete, multiple sets, moving fast. And Carney's eyes went to the corridor over her shoulder, and in the half-second that his attention fractured, Vance's hand came off his side and hit a key on the terminal. The recording indicator light turned green. Transmitted. Reyes came through the door with 2 armed officers and a third on her radio calling positions, and Carney stood in the white light of the secure recording station with the weapon still in his hand and the expression of a man who has just watched every exit close simultaneously. He didn't fire. She had not been certain he wouldn't, and the 3 seconds between Reyes entering and Carney lowering the weapon were the longest 3 seconds she had stood through in 4 years. He lowered it. On the floor, Reyes said. Now. Carney went to his knees with the controlled movement of a man maintaining dignity in the only way still available to him. Elara crossed the room to Vance. He was listing to his right, the color in his face going wrong in a way that told her the exertion had cost him more than he had. She checked his drainage line, still connected, but the output volume in the bag was higher than it had been. Stress response. Physical strain. You need to stop moving around, she said. I know. He looked at Karn being cuffed on the floor, then at the green light on the terminal. Did I get it all? 90 seconds of testimony from a direct witness and a completed secure transmission to an external federal server. She pulled her fingers from his wrist. His pulse was fast, but not dangerous. I think you got enough. He let out a breath that had been held for longer than tonight. Voss, he said, don't thank me. I was going to say you need to check the west sublevel. He coughed. Carney's people. Reyes has it. And Volkov? She looked toward the door. The corridor beyond was full of motion now, the facility fully activated, the specific controlled chaos of a security situation being brought to resolution. Somewhere in it, Dmitry Volkov was either in custody or cooperating or both. She didn't know yet which version she was prepared to accept. One problem at a time, she said. Vance nodded. His eyes were closing, not from danger, but from the accumulated weight of a body that had been through surgery and insanity, and 4 flights of stairs, and a recording session in the space of 3 hours, and was now, finally, being allowed to register all of it. Stay awake, she said. I'm awake. I mean it. Stay awake until I get a monitor on you. I heard you the first time, he said. And then, very quietly, all 12 of them. I have all 12 names in the transmission, on record, with cause. She looked at him. They'll be cleared, he said. All of them. She stood up. She stood up and turned away before her face did something she didn't have the energy to manage right now, and she walked to the door and looked out into the corridor where Reyes was coordinating and Carney was being walked toward containment, and somewhere below them, she knew, 2 of Carney's people were being run to ground. And somewhere in this facility, still unresolved, still in the category of problems she had told Vance she would handle, her radio crackled. One of Reyes's officers on the west sublevel channel. Colonel, we've got the 2 tangos contained, surrendered without engagement. A pause. But Colonel, we've got a problem on the south exit. Camera feed shows the south emergency exit was opened from the inside 40 seconds ago. Reyes looked at Elara. Elara was already calculating. South exit, 40 seconds ago. Before Carney was taken down, before the transmission completed. The west sublevel team had contained 2 people. Volkov had told her there were 2 armed personnel. Carney had been in the recording station. She counted backward through the people she had seen and the people who were now accounted for, and she arrived at the same number twice, and the number was wrong. And what the wrong number meant was that there was someone in this facility she had not factored, someone who had been here the whole time, someone who had just walked out the south exit into the pre-dawn dark. Who else came in with Carney's party? She said to Reyes. Reyes grabbed her tablet, pulled the entry log, read it. Her face changed. 4 personnel listed, she said. 2 confirmed in the west sublevel, Karn in custody. She looked up. The 4th entry is logged as a support technician. Biometrics registered on arrival. She turned the tablet around. The face on the screen was one Elara had never seen before. But the biometric match running beside it, the secondary ID confirmation that the facility's system had quietly processed against its classified personnel database in the last 30 seconds, showed a name she knew. A name from a different file. A name that meant the conspiracy was not Karne and Volkov and 2 armed personnel. It was larger, and one part of it was running. The name on the tablet was Soren Bask. Elara didn't know the face, but she knew the name from a secondary file she had read once, 3 years into her quiet life in Caldwell City, on a night when she had broken her own rule about not looking and had pulled what she could access through an encrypted back channel that a former colleague had set up before his own disappearance. Bask was listed as a logistics coordinator, attached to 3 separate classified operations over 8 years, none of which had his name in any prominent position. He was the kind of person who existed in the margins of official records, never the lead, never the decision-maker, always the support layer that made the decision-maker's choices operational, the support layer that made Greywire possible. "How long ago did the exit open?" she said. 40 seconds on camera. Could be longer if you moved before the feed recovered from the power cut. She was already calculating. South exit led to the facility's exterior, which on the eastern side was wooded ridge, and on the western side was a service road that connected to the main approach 2 kilometers out. A man running had maybe a 4-minute head start on foot. A man with a vehicle staged, and a logistics coordinator would absolutely have a vehicle staged, had a head start that was already becoming irrelevant. Does the facility have exterior cameras on the south side? 2, both on battery backup. Reyes pulled the feed on her tablet. The image was grainy, low-power recording, the kind that captures movement more than detail. But it showed the south exit door hanging open and a figure moving away from it at a controlled jog. Not panicked, purposeful. "He's heading west," Elara said. "Service road." "I can get a vehicle?" "How long?" 3 minutes to get someone to the motor pool. 3 minutes was not a useful number. "Radio the perimeter, block the service road at the main junction. He can't reach the highway if you close the junction." Reyes was already on it, and Elara turned back to the recording station where Vance was still in the chair and looking considerably worse than he had 4 minutes ago. His pallor had moved from bad to concerning, the kind of gray that meant his body was registering the accumulated damage and starting to insist on being heard. She crossed to him and pressed 2 fingers to his wrist. His pulse was 118. Fast, but the rhythm was regular. She checked the drainage output again. The volume had increased since she'd last looked, which meant the exertion had stressed the repair, but the color of the output was still within acceptable range. No fresh arterial bleed, the suture line was holding. He was going to be fine. Probably. If he stopped moving. "You need to go back to the suite," she said. "I'm aware." "Right now. Not in 5 minutes." "I know, Voss." He looked up at her. His eyes were clear despite everything else going wrong with his body, which told her his mental function was intact even while everything below the neck was staging a protest. "The 4th person. We'll get him." Bask has been managing Karn's external communications for 6 years. If he gets out of this facility with what's on his personal devices, he can... I know what he can do. She looked at Reyes. "Get 2 people to walk him back to the suite. Not 1. 2. Then she looked at Vance. "Let them." He started to argue. "Harlan." It was the first time she had used his first name and they both noticed it. "You did your part. You got the transmission out. Let me finish the rest." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has spent decades being the one who finishes things and is finding it unexpectedly difficult to hand that off. "Don't let him reach the road," he said. She was already moving. The south exit opened onto a narrow concrete apron that served as an equipment staging area, and beyond that a slope of cleared ground dropped toward the tree line 50 meters out. The pre-dawn air hit her when she pushed through the door, cold and damp. The specific dark that exists in the 20 minutes before the sky starts making decisions about becoming light. She could see the service road running parallel to the tree line to her left. No vehicle visible yet. Either Bask had parked beyond the ridge curve, or Movement. Tree line. 30 meters right of the road. He wasn't running for the road. He was going through the trees. She moved. The slope was uneven and she went down it fast without being careful about it, which meant by the time she hit the flat at the bottom, her left ankle had turned once on a route she hadn't seen, and she was running with the specific discomfort of something that hadn't quite twisted but was definitely registering its objection. She ignored it. The tree line closed around her and the darkness went from dark to very dark, the canopy cutting what little pre-dawn light there was. She could hear him. Not well. He was good at moving quietly, which tracked for someone who had spent years as a logistics coordinator on classified operations. But she had grown up in environments where hearing was the primary sense and seeing was secondary, and there was enough to follow. Branch displacement. The particular compression of wet leaves underfoot that happens when weight shifts forward rather than when wind moves through. He was heading uphill, which meant he knew this terrain or had studied it because the ridge crest above the tree line was where the facility's exterior security cameras had their widest blind spot. She had mapped it mentally from the schematics on the helicopter, and Basque had presumably done the same thing with considerably more preparation time. She climbed. Her scrubs were not designed for this. Her shoes, standard-issue nursing clogs, practical for standing on concrete for 12 hours, were genuinely terrible for scrambling up a wet, dark ridge at 5 in the morning. She lost traction twice. The second time she went down on one knee, and her palm hit rock and she pushed off it, and kept going because stopping was a choice, and she had chosen not to stop. At the ridge crest, she broke through the tree line into open air. Basque was 20 meters ahead, moving along the ridge line toward a section that dropped away on the far side. He had a pack. Small, tactical, the kind that a careful man would have staged with whatever he needed if the operation went wrong. He heard her emerge from the trees and looked back. For half a second they assessed each other across the ridge. Then he ran. She ran. The ridge was uneven and narrow in places, and the footing was uncertain in both directions, and she was running in clogs and he was running in proper boots, and that was a real disadvantage she did not have the luxury of accounting for. She ran anyway, and she was faster than he expected. She could tell because the gap didn't widen the way he was clearly anticipating, and she watched his pace adjust upward and watched the adjustment cost him something in terms of sure-footedness, and she calculated that at this rate she had maybe 90 seconds before he reached the far drop and whatever was on the other side of it. She stopped calculating and ran harder. 30 seconds from the drop, his boot caught a loose rock. It was not a dramatic fall. He didn't go down completely, but the stumble broke his stride and she closed the gap to 10 meters, and then 8, and then he recovered and surged, and she went low without thinking about it, the old muscle memory making a decision her conscious mind was still catching up to, and hit him from behind at the knees. They went down together on the ridge in a graceless, hard tangle that cost both of them. She felt the impact in her shoulder and her hip and the ankle that had already complained about the route, and he came down on his pack and twisted under it, and they were both on the ground in the cold dark with the sound of the wind across the ridge and the distant, minimal light of a sky beginning very slowly to become something other than black. He was faster getting up than she expected. The pack swung and she ducked it and got inside the swing and put her forearm across his throat. Not a choke, a positioning control, the kind of hold that doesn't kill anyone but makes standing up a negotiation with her arm rather than a decision he makes unilaterally. "Stop," she said. He stopped. He was breathing hard. So was she. "The pack," she said. "You don't—" "The pack. Take it off slowly and set it on the ground." He did it. His hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, she thought, but from the physiological response to exertion and adrenaline and the specific cognitive experience of a plan failing in real time. She pulled him back from it and kept her arm where it was and looked at the pack. "What's on your devices?" she said. "Nothing you'll be able to access." "That's not what I asked." He was quiet for a moment. The ridge wind moved through the tree line below them, and somewhere in the facility behind her she could hear, very distantly, the sound of a vehicle engine. Reyes's team reaching the motor pool. 12 years of operational support documentation, Basque said. His voice was flat, in the way of someone who has gone past the performance of composure into something more like its absence. Everything Carney sanctioned, every operation he ran off book, communications, financial transfers, the names of people in 3 different federal agencies who were on the network. She absorbed that. 3 federal agencies, not just the directorate, deeper than she had understood. "Why were you running?" she said. "Because the transmission Vance sent will trigger an investigation, and an investigation will—" He stopped. "We'll catch you," she finished. "We'll catch everyone," he said, "including people who will not go quietly." She thought about that word choice, not defensively. Not "I don't want to be caught." Everyone. People who will not go quietly. "How many people are we talking about?" she said. He looked at the pack on the ground, then at the sky, which had started to make its decision and was producing the first faint gradation of gray at the eastern horizon. "Enough," he said, "that whoever built this investigation better have protection in place before the first arrest." She held his arm. She held it and looked at the pack and thought about 12 years of documentation and 3 federal agencies and the specific weight of a thing that was much larger than she had been given to understand tonight. Then she pulled out the radio Reyes had clipped to her waistband before she left the building. "Reyes," she said. The response came back in seconds. "We see you on the ridge camera. Team is 40 seconds out. I have Basque. He's secured, and I need a federal evidence team on his personal devices before anyone else touches them." She paused. "Tell Vance the network is bigger than Karn. He'll know what to do with that." Static. Then, "Copy." She kept hold of Basque's arm and looked at the eastern sky and waited for 40 seconds. By the time the facility's security team reached the ridge and took Basque into custody, the sky had gone from gray to the specific pale gold of a sunrise that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but simply arrives. She walked back down through the trees with her ankle complaining and her shoulder aching and her hospital scrubs covered in dirt and leaf matter from the knees down. And she thought about nothing in particular, which was the specific mental state that follows the moment when the thing you have been running on adrenaline to prevent has been prevented. Reyes met her at the south exit. "Vance is back in the suite," the colonel said. "His pressure is holding. Okafor says the drainage output has normalized." "Good." "Carne is in containment. Volkov has been requesting to speak to whoever is leading the federal review." Reyes paused. "And I have a federal investigative team on a helicopter that will be here in 22 minutes. Elara looked at her. "That was fast." Vance set it in motion before he left for the recording station. He had contingencies. Reyes said it with a tone that carried something between exasperation and respect. He's been running this for 2 years. He had people positioned. He just needed to survive long enough to trigger them. Yes. They went inside. The facility had its main power back. The technical team had found and bypassed the cut, which turned out to be a manual disconnect on the main junction panel in the sublevel. The kind of thing that takes 30 seconds to do and 30 seconds to undo once you know where to look. The lights were fully on, and the normal hum of a functioning installation had returned, and the red emergency lighting was gone. And in the full white light of the facility, things looked different, more ordinary. Less like a crisis and more like its aftermath, which is a different kind of difficult. Elara went to the medical supply room and wrapped her ankle, a mild sprain, the kind that hurts for a week and then stops mattering, and washed the blood off her palm from the rock on the ridge, and sat on a supply crate for 3 minutes doing nothing except letting her body understand that it was allowed to stop. The 3 minutes felt longer than the surgery. The federal team arrived at 6:04 a.m. in 2 helicopters. Not military, but the specific type of civilian federal hybrid that exists in the jurisdiction overlap between intelligence oversight and criminal investigation. 7 people, 4 of whom went immediately to the containment area where Carne was held, and 3 of whom went to the secure recording station to begin processing the transmission Vance had sent. Elara watched them arrive from the operations center window. Reyes came to stand beside her. "They'll want your account," the colonel said. "Full debrief, probably multiple sessions." "I know." "It won't be pleasant. Graywire is going to be reviewed in full, and you're the only surviving member of the team, which means I know what it means." She watched the federal team move through the facility entrance. "It means I spend 6 months in depositions explaining things I spent 4 years trying to stop thinking about." Reyes was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, what you did tonight. The surgery, the transmission, bask on the ridge. She paused in the way of someone who is choosing between the easy version of a thing and the true version. I've been in this work for 17 years. I've seen good people operate under pressure. What you did tonight was not ordinary. Elara didn't answer immediately. She looked at the window. I was a nurse in an emergency room this time yesterday, she said. Yes. I still am. Reyes looked at her. Is that what you want? It was a question she had not been asked in 4 years by anyone, including herself. She had arranged her life specifically to avoid that question. The small apartment, the predictable shift, the careful invisibility. Those choices had been a form of answer. This. Just this. Quiet and small and without consequences. Except the consequences had come anyway. I don't know yet, she said. And that was the truest thing she had said all night. Elliot Karn's formal interrogation began at 7:15 a.m. in the facility's secure debrief room, and Elara was not present for it, but Reyes was, and what came out of the first hour was enough to restructure everything she thought she'd understood about the architecture of what she'd walked into tonight. Karn talked. Not because he was broken, he wasn't, not in the way that pressure breaks people, but because he was 60 years old and the transmission had gone out, and the federal team had his devices, and Bask was in custody, and the 2 tactical personnel from the West sublevel had already been processed, and the particular calculation that Karn had been running for 12 years had finally produced a number that didn't work in his favor. He was, above all things, a practical man. He had built this network on practical decisions. He ended it the same way. Reyes summarized it for Elara in the corridor outside the operations center at 8:40 a.m. Reading from notes in a flat voice that was doing the specific work of someone delivering information, they are still processing emotionally. Greywire had not been a failed extraction. It had been a deliberate compromise. A foreign intelligence service had offered Karn a significant financial arrangement in exchange for the team's position. Not the asset, not the mission objective, just the position of the forward medical unit that was attached to the extraction. The logic, as Karn explained it, was that neutralizing the medical support created deniability. No medical team, no survivors to give accounts. The Foreign Service had been running an asset inside the same facility where the extraction target was held, and a clean kill of the extraction team would have been attributed to that asset's security apparatus. Clean, simple, no fingerprints. 12 people were the cost of clean. Elara stood in the corridor and listened to this and felt the particular quality of something that had been theoretical becoming concrete. She had known for 4 years that it had been betrayal. She had known in the abstract. Hearing the mechanics of it, hearing that it was a financial arrangement, that her team had been the collateral in a transaction, was a different kind of knowing. The Foreign Service contact, she said. Does he have a name? Karn gave us one, we're running it. Reyes looked at her. Are you all right? Keep going. Reyes looked at her notes. Volkov was Karn's cutout. He was the one who physically transmitted the position. He was told the compromise was limited, a controlled disclosure that would redirect the Foreign Service's attention while the actual asset extracted through a secondary route. He was not told the team was the target. She paused. He found out afterward. And he stayed working for Karn, that he was given a choice that wasn't a choice. Reyes said it carefully. I'm not defending it. I'm characterizing it. I know the difference. His testimony is going to be significant. He has documentation going back 4 years, dates, communications, operational support records. He kept them. Reyes looked at her with a slightly different expression. He's been building a case too, longer than Vance. Elara thought about the sub-level corridor, the way he had stepped aside from the server rack, the keycard he had left on the shelf, the 4-word message he had sent to Karn's phone that had redirected Karn's attention. She understood now, working backward through the timeline, that the message had been a misdirection. Volkov had been moving pieces for a long time. Tonight had been the board clearing. What happens to him, she said. Federal protection and a cooperation agreement pending review. Reyes paused. It won't be clean. None of this will be clean. No, she said. It won't. She walked down the corridor toward the recovery suite. Vance was awake and considerably more stable than he had any right to be. His pressure was reading 101 systolic on the monitor, which was not good but was dramatically better than 54, and Okafor had replaced the drainage bag and rechecked the suture line and reported with the slightly odd expression of someone who keeps encountering outcomes that exceed the probability table that the repair was holding. He looked at Elara when she came in the way people look at someone they have been waiting to see. "Basque," he said. "In custody. Federal team has his devices." "The network." "I know. Reyes briefed me." She sat down in the chair beside the bed, not the chair of a visitor being gracious, but the chair of someone whose legs had been working since 2 in the morning and had earned sitting down. 3 federal agencies. At least 3. He looked at the ceiling. There are going to be people who try to contain this. People inside the investigation structure who are connected and will see it coming and start moving before the first arrest. Basque warned me about that on the ridge. He was right to. Vance turned his head to look at her. He looked exhausted in a way that surgery and blood loss only partly explained. The exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a heavy thing alone for a very long time and has just set it down and is feeling its full weight for the first time now that it's no longer in his hands. "I need you to stay involved." She looked at him. "As what?" "As a witness. As an operative record. As the person who can testify to the field realities of gray wire in a way that no document can." He paused. "They'll try to reduce it to paperwork. They always do. People who weren't there reduce it to paperwork because that's how it stops being real. My testimony is going to take months." "Yes." "And Caldwell City." She looked at her hands, still marked from the ridge, from the rock, from a night's worth of surgical work and corridor running. "My job. Mercy Ridge will give you a leave. I'll make sure of it." "You're going to call a hospital on my behalf?" "I'm going to do what's necessary," he said, and there was no performance in it, just the quiet certainty of a man who had nearly died to get to this point and was not interested in losing the details now. She sat with that. The recovery suite was quiet. Outside, she could hear the distant rhythm of the investigation taking shape. Voices in corridors, the occasional radio crackle, the procedural machinery of accountability beginning to run. It was not a satisfying sound exactly. It was too early for satisfying. What it was real. The specific reality of something being done after years of something being buried. "The 12, she said. "Vance, tell me they'll actually be cleared. Not a memo, not a file notation. Official record correction. Named, with cause. I put it in the transmission in explicit terms." He looked at her steadily. "It will happen." She nodded once, and didn't say anything else about it because there wasn't anything else to say. Some things can't be repaired. They can only be acknowledged, and acknowledged correctly, and that would have to be enough. "Sleep," she said. "I'm serious this time." "I know. I'll be in the building." He closed his eyes. She watched his breathing slow to something that was finally closer to rest than performance. She stood. She turned off the overhead light and left the monitoring light on and stepped out of the suite. The federal debrief began at 10 o'clock. It was conducted by a woman named Investigator Petra Halm, who was compact and methodical and had the particular quality of attentiveness that the best interrogators develop. Not the aggressive attentiveness that tries to catch you out, but the patient kind that makes you feel that what you're saying is landing somewhere it will be kept. They sat in the debrief room. Full power now, normal lighting, a table and 2 chairs, and a recording system that Halm explained in plain terms before she turned it on. And Elara told her the night, all of it, the surgery, the ballistic match, the sublevel corridor and Vance at the recording terminal, and the ridge and Basque's pack, and what Basque had said on the ridge about people who will not go quietly. Halm asked precise questions. She didn't interrupt unnecessarily. When something needed clarifying, she said so directly and without the apologetic framing that less confident interrogators use. At one point, she looked up from her notes and said, "Before tonight, were you aware of any active monitoring of your civilian address or employment?" Elara paused. "No." "Why?" "We found a surveillance file in Carney's personal documents. Your apartment, your shift schedule, Vehicle registration. Holmes' voice didn't change. It's dated 14 months ago. Elara absorbed that. He'd been watching you, Holmes said. Not actively, but as a contingency, in case you started asking questions. She thought about the apartment with the window that faced the parking garage. The carefully maintained small footprint. The registered phone 2 states over. The years of deliberate invisibility that she had thought were working. They had been working. Carney had known where she was and had watched and had determined that she was, for all practical purposes, contained. She had been staying disappeared so effectively that the man who'd tried to kill her team had concluded she wasn't a threat. Until tonight, when he had needed her, and the need had brought her back into visibility, and the calculation had changed. Is there anything else in the file? She said. I'll have everything relevant to you processed and disclosed in accordance with the review protocols. Holmes paused. I want you to know that your full account tonight, the surgery, the evidence preservation, the apprehension of Basque, will be formally documented as material to the federal investigation. You will be cited accurately. Cited. Named. With specific contribution. Holmes met her eyes. In my experience, people in your position have been miscited or not cited at all. I want to be explicit that this office intends to do it correctly. Elara looked at her. I'm not looking for credit, she said. I know. Holmes wrote something in her notes. But you'll get it anyway. By early afternoon, the containment and processing of the night's events had settled into the long procedural work that follows acute crisis. Documentation, evidence chain management, coordinated federal notifications, the careful and unglamorous labor of turning a night of chaos into a record that would hold informal review. Elara was given a room in the facility's residential section. Clean clothes, a guest supply of unmarked civilian gear, nothing that fit perfectly, the kind of thing that exists in every secure facility for exactly this eventuality. She showered. She ate something from the cafeteria that she could not afterward have named. She sat on the edge of the bed in the residential room and held her phone, which had 37 unread messages from Mercy Ridge General's staff communications system, and looked at it. Then she called Patrice Wynne. The phone rang twice. Elara. Patrice's voice had the quality of someone who had been awake all night by choice, following a situation they weren't being given information about. Is everything, I'm fine. A long exhale. You left in a military helicopter at 2:30 in the morning. I know. It's 2 in the afternoon. I know that too. Silence. Then, is there anything you can tell me? Not yet. Soon. She looked at the wall of the residential room. How's Marcus Webb? Patrice took a moment. Doing well. Pressure has been stable since shift change. Dr. Sato has been in twice to check on him. Good. His mother asked about the nurse who noticed the tamponade. Elara said nothing. I told her it was you, Patrice said. I hope that was okay. That's fine. Another pause. Elara, whatever happened tonight, Patrice. What? I'll explain everything when I can. I promise. She meant it. Tell Schaefer I'll need a leave of absence, probably several months. The silence on the other end had a texture to it. Schaefer has been at the hospital all night, Patrice said slowly. He didn't go home after shift. I don't know how to describe it. He's been asking questions, quiet ones. About what? About you. About your background. About what he doesn't know. Another pause. He's not the same since last night. Whatever you said to him before you left, something landed. She thought about that. He'll be fine, she said. Will you? She looked at her hands, the wrapped ankle, the scrubs that weren't hers. The phone registered to an address 2 states over that no longer needed to be. Working on it, she said. She ended the call. She sat in the quiet of the residential room for a while. Then she lay back on the bed with her arm over her eyes, not sleeping, just letting herself be horizontal in a room where nothing was actively on fire. And she stayed like that for 20 minutes. At 2:47 p.m., someone knocked on the door. She sat up. Come in. Reyes opened the door. She was carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and had the expression of someone delivering information they hadn't anticipated. "Halm needs you back in the debrief room," she said. Elara stood. "Now?" "Now." Reyes held out one of the cups. "She found something in the Carne documents, something that doesn't connect to anything we've been discussing." She took the cup. "What is it?" "A name." Reyes looked at her directly. "A name attached to a payment record that runs 18 months before Graywire, not a foreign service contact, domestic. Someone who was providing pre-mission intelligence to Carne's network before the operation was even formally authorized." Elara looked at her. "Someone inside the mission planning process." "Someone inside the mission planning process who is not Carne, not Basque, not any of the people currently in custody." Reyes paused. "Someone who has been unaccounted for in every review of this operation, because their name was never in any official record." "Who?" Reyes looked at the coffee cup in her own hand like she was considering whether the caffeine was worth the trouble. "The name in the document is a call sign, not a legal name. We ran it through the classified personnel registry, and we got a match." She looked up. "The match is a woman, 41 years old, former field operative, separated from service 3 years ago under a medical designation." A beat. "Her separation date is 6 months after Graywire." The room felt different suddenly. Not physically. The same walls, the same institutional furniture, the same afternoon light through the small window. But the air had changed the way air changes when the shape of a thing you thought you understood turns out to be larger than you had prepared for. "Separated 6 months after," Elara said, "not immediately after." "No." "So she was still operational during the investigation period?" "Yes." "She would have had access to the internal review?" "Yes." Reyes's voice was careful. "And the internal review was how Carne's file closure was processed without challenge. The review board that signed off on the failed extraction determination. 3 members." A pause. "We've confirmed the identities of 2 of them. The 3rd member's identity was classified at the time of the review, and the classification has never been lifted." She understood before Reyes said it. "We think the 3rd member is the same person," Reyes said. "Which means someone sat on the review board that closed the Graywire investigation, and that same person was in Karn's payment records 18 months before the operation, and that same person has been unidentified and unaccounted for 4 years." Elara set the coffee cup on the dresser. "And she's not in this facility," she said. "No, and she knows by now that Carne is in custody, and the transmission has gone out." "That would be a reasonable assumption." "So she's moving." "That would also be a reasonable assumption." Reyes held the door open. "Halm wants to discuss containment options. She wants your read on the operational profile, but you are the closest to the Graywire mission structure, and if this person was embedded in the planning process, there's a possibility you encountered her." Elara picked up the coffee and walked toward the door. She had encountered a lot of people in the mission planning process 4 years ago. Names and faces and the specific social texture of people who worked in classified operations, which was its own world with its own particular way of being that she had learned to read and had then spent 4 years trying to unlearn. But there was one face that had come to mind the moment Reyes said 41 years old, former field operative, separated 3 years ago. A face from a briefing room. A woman who had been running logistics for the Graywire authorization chain, who had asked very precise questions about the medical team's insertion timing, who had the kind of attentiveness that Elara had registered at the time as professional thoroughness and was now reclassifying as something else entirely. She stopped in the doorway. "The call sign in the document," she said. "What is it?" Reyes checked her notes. "Meridian." Elara stood in the doorway of the residential room with a paper cup of bad coffee and 4 years of a rebuilt life behind her, and a name she had just placed rearranging everything she had understood about tonight, and about Graywire, and about the specific shape of what was still not finished. She had seen Meridian last week, not here, not in a classified facility, in Caldwell City at the hospital, in the waiting room of Mercy Ridge General, on a Tuesday evening, sitting with the particular patient stillness of someone who was not waiting to be seen by a doctor. Waiting, she understood now, to be seen by her. She told Reyes in the corridor, walking, because standing still felt wrong for information that was still moving inside her. Tuesday evening, she said. 5 days ago. I was finishing a shift and I saw her in the waiting room on my way out. I didn't recognize her consciously. It was a face from 4 years ago, different hair, different context, but something registered. She looked at Reyes. I remember thinking she looked out of place. Did she make contact? No. I assumed she was waiting for someone in the ER. She paused. She was watching the entrance, not the treatment corridor, the main entrance, where staff come in. Reyes was already on her radio. She pulled it up and spoke quickly. Halm's name, Meridian, Caldwell City, possible surveillance of civilian placement. The response from the operations center was immediate and not reassuring. No known current location, no active tracking. The identity had been cold in the system for 3 years. The debrief room looked exactly the same as it had 2 hours ago. Halm was at the table with 3 times as many documents spread across it, and the focused expression of someone who had been handed a thread and pulled it and found it attached to considerably more than expected. Tell me the face, Halm said the moment Elara sat down. She described it. Halm listened without writing, which meant she was running a parallel mental comparison against something she already had. When Elara finished, Halm turned one of the documents on the table around and slid it across. A photograph. Surveillance quality, slightly grainy. A woman in civilian clothes entering a parking structure in a city that was not Caldwell City. The timestamp was 8 months ago. Elara looked at the face. That's her, she said. Her legal name is Adela Sorge, Halm said. The call sign Meridian was her operational designation. She was a field operative and later a planning liaison. She moved between field and administrative roles, which gave her access to both the mission structure and the internal review process. Halm pulled the photograph back. She's been living under a constructed civilian identity in a city 40 minutes from Caldwell City for the past 2 years. 40 minutes. The same radius as the facility Elara had been brought to tonight. She positioned herself near me, Elara said, and near this facility. Halm's voice stayed level. We believe she's been serving as a monitoring layer for Carney's network, watching you, watching the facility, providing early warning if either became a problem. She saw me arrive tonight. The facility's external approach road has a public overlook 2 kilometers out. If she was monitoring the approach, she would have seen the Black Hawk come in. Halm paused. She has approximately a 7-hour head start on active flight. We have federal alerts on her identity documents, but she's a trained operative who has been living undercover for 2 years. She'll have alternatives. The room was quiet for a moment. She's not going to run, Elara said. Halm looked at her. What makes you say that? Because she's been 40 minutes from me for 2 years, and she didn't run then. She was watching, monitoring, keeping the network informed. She looked at the document spread across the table. She doesn't run, she manages. It's what she does. A beat. And right now, the thing she needs to manage is the fact that the network is gone, and the only remaining question is what she does with what she knows. Which is what? Elara thought about a woman sitting in a hospital waiting room watching the staff entrance. Not panicked, patient. The specific patience of someone who has been running a long game and is still running it. She knows where I live, Elara said. She knows my schedule. She's had 2 years of observation. She looked at Halm. If I were her, I would go to the one place that still gives me leverage. Halm understood immediately. She was already reaching for her radio. The drive to Caldwell City took 38 minutes in a federal vehicle with Halm in the front and Elara in the back, and 2 additional agents following in a second car. Reyes stayed at the facility with Vance, which was the correct call, and also the one Elara would have made. The city came into view as something familiar. The grid she had lived inside for 3 years, the streets she knew by their quality of light at different hours, the particular geography of a life built small. She looked at it through the vehicle window and felt the strange doubling of a place that has been both shelter and cage. Mercy Ridge General's parking structure appeared on the right as they turned onto Foundry Street. The main entrance was visible beyond it. At this hour, late afternoon, shift change approaching. The front of the hospital had its normal rhythm of arrivals and departures, ambulances at the side bay, a cluster of people near the entrance. "Approach from the east," Elara said. "Don't stop in front." Halm relayed it to the driver without discussion. They went in through the staff entrance on the east side, which required a badge Elara no longer technically had active. Hers had been in her locker since 2 in the morning. But the security desk officer recognized her face and buzzed them through with the expression of someone who was going to have questions later and was choosing to defer them appropriately. The ER was in its afternoon rhythm. Elara walked through it with Halm at her shoulder and 2 agents behind and felt the specific strangeness of returning to an ordinary place with extraordinary weight in her pockets. The nurses at the station looked up. Some of them held her gaze longer than usual. She didn't stop. Patrice was at the medication cart near Bay 2. She saw Elara and his agents, and her face ran through 3 separate expressions in 2 seconds before settling on the controlled alertness of someone who has worked emergency medicine long enough to recognize that something is actively happening and calm is required. "Have you seen anyone unusual in the building in the last 2 hours?" Elara said quietly. "Someone you didn't recognize, possibly asking about staff." Patrice's eyes moved to the agents and back. "There was a woman at the front desk about an hour ago. She said she was looking for the nursing director's office. I pointed her toward admin." A pause. "She didn't go toward admin." "Where did she go?" "Toward the elevator bank." Patrice's voice had dropped. "I remember because I thought it was odd, but then a patient came in and Which floor is your break room on?" 3? Elara looked at Halm. "Staff break room, 3rd floor. It's the only space on this floor with a clear sight line to both the main entrance and the staff entrance. She knows the building." They took the stairs. The 3rd floor break room was at the end of the east corridor, a room Elara had spent 1,000 hours in, drinking bad coffee and reading paperbacks and enduring Roman Schaefer's particular management style. She knew its layout without thinking about it: the main door, the window that faced the parking structure, the small attached storage room whose door was often left open because the latch was unreliable. The storage room door was closed. Halm saw it at the same moment Elara did. The 2 agents moved to flank position without instruction. Halm positioned herself left of the main door. Elara was in the corridor with nothing: no weapon, no vest, the same scrubs she had borrowed from the facility's guest supply, the same wrapped ankle, the same empty hands that had gone through this entire night making do with what they had. She put her hand on the break room door. Halm shook her head once. Elara looked at her. Then she pushed the door open and walked in. The break room was empty. Coffee machine running. Someone's half-eaten lunch on the table. The window was showing the parking structure in flat afternoon light. The storage room door moved. Not dramatically. A centimeter of shift, the way a door moves when the person behind it has just redistributed their weight. Elara walked to the break room table and pulled out the chair where she had been sitting at 3:51 a.m. this morning when a coffee cup had been knocked to the floor, and she sat down in it. "I know you're in there," she said. Not loudly, just conversationally, the way you talk to someone who is in the same room. Silence. "The network is gone," she said. "Carne is in federal custody. Basque is in federal custody. The gray wire transmission has been received and processed by 3 federal offices. Volkov is cooperating." She paused. "There's nothing left to manage." The storage room door opened. Adela Sorge looked older than the surveillance photograph and younger than her file suggested, which was the particular quality of people who have spent years performing normalcy. It ages some things and preserves others. She was dressed in civilian clothes, unremarkable, and she was not holding a weapon, which Elara noticed and catalogued. She looked at Elara, then at the door behind Elara, where she could presumably see or sense the agents in the corridor. "You walked in without backup," Sorge said. "I walked in first," Elara said. "Different thing." Something shifted in Sorge's expression. Not softening exactly, more like recalibration. The expression of someone who has been running a model of another person and is adjusting it against new data. "Sit down," Elara said. Sorge didn't move. "Adela." She used the name deliberately. "Sit down." She sat. Not the chair across the table, the one beside it, which put her at an angle rather than in direct opposition. Elara noticed the choice and didn't comment on it. They looked at each other. "You were in the authorization chain," Elara said. "Yes." "You knew the team's position was being disclosed." A pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. "I knew a controlled compromise was being run. I didn't know the full scope of Carne's arrangement with the Foreign Service." "But you knew people were going to die." "I knew there was elevated risk." Sorga's voice was even in the way of someone who has rehearsed a version of this conversation internally for a long time and is now delivering it under conditions that are not what they imagined. "I was told the medical team would be extracted before—" "Don't!" Elara said. Sorge stopped. "Volkov told me the same thing, word for word. That's what Carney told everyone." She looked at her. "But you sat on the review board afterward. You saw the casualty report. You saw 12 names, and you signed the closure." The room was quiet enough to hear the coffee machine running. "Yes," Sorge said. No qualification. No because. Just yes. It was, Elara thought, the most honest thing anyone connected to Greywire had said to her in 4 years, and it made her angrier and less angry simultaneously, which was not a simple feeling to sit with. Halm came through the door then, and the 2 agents with her, and the geometry of the room changed in the way it changes when a private conversation becomes an official one. Sorge looked at Halm and then back at Elara with the expression of someone who has run out of moves and knows it. "Is there anything else you want to tell me?" Elara said. Before this becomes her conversation. Sorge looked at her hands. They were folded on the table in the careful way of someone keeping them still on purpose. "I've been watching you for 2 years, she said quietly, waiting to see if you'd move, if you'd start asking questions." She looked up. "You never did. I know." "I thought that meant you'd made peace with it." "I hadn't," Elara said. "I'd just gotten very good at carrying it." Sorge held her gaze for a moment longer. Then she looked at Halm and said, "I'll cooperate fully," in the flat voice of someone choosing the door that's left when all the others have closed. Halm stepped forward. The agents moved. The procedural machinery of an arrest engaged with its specific and unglamorous efficiency, and Adela Sorge was walked out of the Mercy Ridge General Break Room and through the east corridor and down the staff stairs and out of the building, and that was the end of the last piece. Elara stayed in the break room after they left. She sat at the table in the chair she had occupied for 3 years of night shifts, and she looked at the window and she let the silence be what it was. There was no dramatic release, no wave of relief, no sudden lightness. There was just the specific quality of a thing being finished, which felt less like an ending and more like a room that has been emptied of furniture. The same walls, the same dimensions, different in a way that would take time to understand. She heard footsteps in the corridor. One set, unhurried. Roman Schaefer appeared in the doorway. He was in civilian clothes. He had been off shift since morning, but had clearly not left, which tracked with what Patrice had said. He looked at her across the break room with an expression she had not seen on his face before in 3 years, which was the expression of a man who is aware he has been wrong about something significant and is trying to find the right size for the admission. He came in. He didn't sit. "Patrice said you were up here," he said. "I know." He looked at the table, the empty coffee machine, the half-eaten lunch that belonged to someone else. "I filed a behavioral note on you," he said, "in your personnel file, a week ago." "I know." "I'm having it removed." "Okay." He looked up. "That's all you're going to say?" She looked at him. Roman Schaefer, who had knocked a cup off a counter and filed paperwork on her for not being grateful about it, who had tried to keep her out of a trauma bay where a 15-year-old boy would have died without her, who had spent 3 years treating the person beside him like furniture, and was now standing in the break room of his own hospital at 5 in the afternoon, trying to find language for the distance between who he had been and who he might become. She thought about what it would mean to hold this against him. She also thought about what it would cost to carry it. "You get to decide who you are next," she said, "not who you were. Who you are next." She stood up from the chair. "Don't waste it on apologies to me. Spend it on the residents who are watching how you treat people and learning from it." He stood with that for a moment. It wasn't comfortable. She didn't intend it to be comfortable. Real things rarely are. "The boy," he said. "Marcus Webb. What about him?" His mother asked me which nurse saved his life. He paused. I told her the truth. She looked at him. "I told her your name," he said, "and I told her you were the best clinical observer I have worked with in 20 years. He said it the way you say something that is both true and late. Both of those things are true." She nodded once. "I know." She walked past him toward the corridor. At the doorway, she stopped without turning around. "Schaefer," she said. "What?" "The next time a resident calls something you missed, say, 'Thank you,' that day." She paused. "Not in the debrief, not in a note. That day." She didn't wait for an answer. She went to the corridor and took the elevator down. And this time she went all the way to the ground floor and walked through the ER and out the main entrance and stood on the pavement outside Mercy Ridge General in the late afternoon light of a city that had been her hiding place and was now, she thought, something else, something without a clear name yet. The federal vehicle was still at the curb. Halm was outside it, on the phone, with the brisk expression of someone managing 12 simultaneous consequential conversations. She saw Elara and held up a hand. One moment. Elara waited. The late afternoon had the particular quality of late afternoon in late autumn. The light going long and gold and slightly melancholy. The kind of light that makes ordinary things look considered. She looked at the street. A bus passed. A man walked a dog. Two nurses came through the entrance behind her, mid-conversation about something she couldn't catch, moving with the purposeful exhaustion of the end of a shift. The ordinary city. The ordinary life she had assembled around herself like a shelter. She had hidden in it long enough. Halm ended the call and turned to her. "We've confirmed Sorge's cooperation agreement is being processed. She's provided 2 additional names in the network, both domestic, both still employed in federal positions. Warrants are in motion." She paused. "This is going to run for months." "I know. You'll need to be accessible." "I'll be accessible." She looked at the hospital entrance. "From here." Halm looked at her. "You're staying." "I'm a nurse," Elara said, "and this is my hospital. And there's a 15-year-old named Marcus Webb on the 3rd floor who I want to check on before I do anything else." She looked at Halm directly. "The investigation gets my testimony, my full cooperation, and as many debrief sessions as you need, but I'm not disappearing into this case. I'm not letting it be my whole life." "It's an unprecedented situation." "Yes," and my answer is still no. She said it without heat, just clearly. "I spent 4 years letting what happened to my team define the shape of everything I did. I'm not doing that again, in either direction." Halm studied her for a moment. Then she nodded. A single, precise nod. The kind that signals genuine comprehension rather than procedural acknowledgement. "The 12, Halm said. "The official record correction, the Directorate is processing it through federal review. Formal documentation, named, with full cause established. It will be public record within 60 days. 60 days. She had waited 4 years. 60 days was nothing. It was also everything. "All 12, she said. "All 12, Halm confirmed. She stood on the pavement outside Mercy Ridge General and let that land. Not with drama. The moment didn't perform itself into something cinematic. It was quiet. A bus went past. The light was still gold. She stood in it and thought about 12 people who had deserved better than a closed file and a classified burial, who had gone into a mission trusting that the information they were given was what it claimed to be, who had not come home from a Tuesday night that was supposed to be 40 minutes on the ground. 12 people who were going to have their names on a correct record in a permanent document with the truth attached. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough in the way that actually mattered. But it was real. And it was accurate. And in her experience, in the experience of someone who had spent years in medicine learning that you cannot fix everything, but you can always do the next correct thing, real and accurate was where you started. She turned and went back inside. Up. Marcus Webb was sitting up in bed at 4:58 p.m., with the particular alert expression of a teenager whose body had been through genuine trauma and had decided, with the specific resilience of 15 years old, that it was fine now, or close enough to fine, or at least fine enough to be bored. He looked at her when she came in. His mother, who was in the chair beside the bed, a woman in her 40s who had the settled look of someone who had been crying for many hours and had arrived at the other side of it, looked up. "Are you the nurse?" the woman said. "The one who—" "I'm one of the nurses who was there," Elara said. "There were several people in that room. The doctor said you were the one who saw it." Elara looked at Marcus. His color was good. His eyes were clear. The drainage from the pericardiocentesis had been minimal and was resolved, and Okafor's follow-up notes from earlier in the day showed everything moving in the right direction. "How do you feel?" she said to him. "Weird," he said. "Like fine, but also like I know I wasn't fine." "That feeling goes away," she said. "Mostly." He looked at her. "Did I die?" "No." "But I was close." She considered giving him the gentle version. She decided he had earned the actual version. "Yes, you were close." He absorbed that with the unaffected directness of someone who hasn't yet learned to flinch from large information. "Okay," he said. His mother made a sound that was not a word. "Thank you," she said to Elara. Her voice had the raw quality of someone operating without a filter because the filter hadn't recovered yet. I don't know what to say except thank you." Elara looked at her. She thought about 12 families who had not gotten to say that. She thought about all the rooms and all the years of her career where someone had or hadn't walked through the door and how much that door swinging open mattered to every single person waiting on the other side. "He's going to be fine," she said. "He should stay another 2 days for monitoring, and he'll need a follow-up echo in 6 weeks. But he's going to be fine." She checked his chart, initialed the nursing notes, confirmed the evening medication schedule with the incoming shift nurse, who appeared at the door with the slightly hesitant energy of someone who was aware something had happened today and didn't have all the information. She gave her the handoff. Accurate, complete, no flourish. She walked out. But the parking lot of Mercy Ridge General at 5:30 in the afternoon was a landscape she had crossed 1,000 times. To her car, to the bus stop half a block east, to the small sandwich place on the corner that she had eaten from so many times she knew the menu by feel. She crossed it now with her wrapped ankle and her borrowed clothes and the specific fatigue of a body that had done surgery and run up a ridge and sat through 4 hours of federal debrief and was being asked to keep moving. She stopped in the middle of the parking lot. She was not in the habit of stopping in the middle of parking lots. She was generally a person who kept moving from one point to the next, who had organized her life to require movement, who had found in the continuous forward momentum of night shifts and patient care a useful substitute for the kind of stillness that asks hard questions. She stopped. She stood in the flat evening light. She let the stillness ask. What she came up with was this. She was tired in a way that sleep would not fix, and she was someone whose name was going to be on a federal record correctly for the first time in 4 years. And she was a nurse who had noticed a distended jugular vein at 2 a.m. and saved a 15-year-old boy's life. And she was the last surviving member of a team that was finally going to be correctly recorded in a permanent document. And she was 34 years old, and she had spent 4 years making herself small in a city that had never really known who she was. She had also, just this morning, been asked by a man who owed her 12 years of classified documentation whether she was willing to stay involved in something larger than hiding. She thought she probably was. Not because it was easier than disappearing again. It was considerably harder. Not because she had suddenly resolved all the things that had made disappearing feel necessary, but because the particular things she had learned in operating rooms and forward medical posts and a single ridge outside a classified facility at 5 a.m. was that the work mattered regardless of whether the person doing it was recognized, and that recognition was not the point, but it was not nothing either, and she was done pretending that she needed neither. She had been strong in secret for 4 years. She was not interested in 4 more. She took out her phone. She found Halm's contact from the new federal number she had been given, and she sent a short message. In for the full review. Start whenever you need. Then she found Patrice's contact and sent, I'm okay. See you Monday. She put the phone in her pocket. She stood in the parking lot of the hospital where she worked, in the city where she had hidden, and she looked at the sky, which was doing what skies do in late autumn, going dramatic without asking permission. The the gold collapsing into orange at the horizon, and the blue above it deepening towards something almost indigo. She was not fixed. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. The things that had been broken 4 years ago were not repaired tonight. Repair takes longer than one night and does not arrive complete. She still had the dream she had always had, and the reflex that made her check exits when she entered rooms, and the specific loneliness of a life that had been built for invisibility rather than connection. But she also had this, her name on a correct record. 12 names on a correct record. The machinery of accountability engaged, imperfect and slow, and dependent on humans who would make mistakes, but engaged and moving in the right direction. And she had her hospital, her patients. The resident named Ike Osato, who had said the right thing in a trauma bay at 2 a.m, and who would, with proper mentorship, become someone very good. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. The difference was that she was going to do it as herself, now, with her full name on the door and her history on the record and no more careful arrangements for not being found. If someone came looking for Elara Voss now, they would find her. She was right here. She walked to her car, drove home through the ordinary evening streets of Caldwell City, and slept for 9 hours without a single dream about a Tuesday night 4 years ago when everything had gone wrong. It was the first time. It would not be the last. But it was the first. And the first is where things begin, and beginning is not nothing. Beginning, she had learned, is exactly everything.